Hi everyone, this is Igor from Vinousreverie, the shop for the adventurous wine drinker. And this is our second episode, everything you ever wanted to know about wine, but were afraid to ask. And we're going to be talking about matching wine and spicy food. So my co-host, Kevin Wank, will join me in 1 minute, and we'll be talking. He'll be giving you his thoughts about spicy food. You know, the difference between spiciness and hotness, and what wines match with that, and kind of the background of the wines that work best. So it should be a fun discussion. So chime in if you have your thoughts on that too. So.
Oh, there he is.
All right, so Kevin's about to jump in. All right. All right, there he is. Kevin, how are you?
Good. My head looks a little large tonight.
No, it looks the same.
Maybe I've been eating too spicy foods or something. I don't know.
It's probably just your ego.
I don't know about that.
All right, Kevin. So this is actually your specialty. All right. So this is Kevin Wang from Wust Imports, and what that stands for is WST Wines You Should Try. And I'm actually looking at your homepage, and the reason you started this business to bring these wines from Europe to the domestic marketplace is basically you're saying why you should try this wine. And first of all, because they're food friendly. They're not fruit bombs that are prestigious critics, as you like to put it in air quotes, like. It's wine
Exactly.
that you have with food, right? And they're interesting. They're different than Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And it's wines that you personally visited. And what you say, if people go to your website at wustwine.com, they can actually browse different wine producers and different wines. And under every wine, you give wine pairings. Now, I haven't seen anybody else do that with their imports. They typically give profiles of the soil, background of the producer, etc., etc. But you actually, for every single wine, you give a food pairing. So I think this is right in your wheelhouse. To discuss wine and food, and in this episode specifically spicy food. And you kind of define for us what spicy versus hot is, and then the structure of wines that pairs well with that. And I chime in with my thoughts and maybe some of the examples that I have too. So
Okay.
go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
The general topic is spicy foods. And, depending on the person, that can mean, spicy foods that have intricate combinations of spices or really hot foods. And you're going to need different wines to pair with both of those. But there's one common element of spiciness, which is additional complexity. And so what you need is wines with more complexity. And what I'm talking about is not the complexity of somebody aging a bottle of wine for 10 to 12 years and then marveling over all the different flavor components that it develops while it aged, but you need a wine currently with a lot of different components to it. And so what I would call one-dimensional wines that are great in other settings, like Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon, frankly, they don't go well with either spicy foods or hot foods. And so, you want a wine with some complexity. Whites, you typically will get that in white blends. Southern Rhone is a great source of this, where you've got, 3 to 5 different white grapes of the Southern Rhone, in a blend. You can get that with some of the white blends of the Languedoc. Italy is particularly fascinating with all the different native varietals all over the country. I mean, Vermentino, Verdeca, Pecorino from Abruzzo, and so you want wines with a lot of different flavor components to complement the complexity of the spicy or the hotter foods that you're eating.
Yes. Should we start with like spicy? Yeah.
So, as I described as spicy, spicy is complex, or is complexity, but it also has, different components of flavors. And so you need a white, we start talking about whites, you need some whites that are going to stand up to that, and so, you get that from a variety of different grapes and different styles. At a minimum, acidity both complements and sort of like balances out the spiciness of food. And so one very common and popular white, with a lot of acidity is Sauvignon Blanc. But then, addition to the overall like acidity that you're looking for, you want something to refresh the palate. And I get there in a couple of different ways. One is wines with like richer fruit to it, like a Chenin Blanc or a Riesling, but with a Riesling, you get kind of a double, effect, where Rieslings are typically grown in very minerally soils. The slate that's typical in Germany. But in addition to, Riesling grown in minerally soils, I mean, you have, other soils like granite. I have a producer from Slovenia where it's just this decomposed granite in the vineyard, and the fresh bursting of this, all these minerals in each sip of wine is just really refreshing. Or all the volcanic terrain all throughout Italy, or in northeastern Spain you also have a similar slate as to what you have in Germany. And so all those minerals in the wine is almost like a granite between courses, to refresh your palate before you go on and have another bite of whatever that spicy food is.
Well, something you mentioned, Riesling and Chenin Blanc. I mean, nothing gets more versatile than those two grapes. Where they work from bone dry to super sweet. And I think, Riesling is probably more known. And typically you see that in a lot of restaurants that serve spicy cuisine. But Chenin Blanc, which is actually what I'm having from Montlouis sur Loire, and it's off dry. So there's a slight sweetness to it. It's actually, tonight, funny enough, prepping for our show, we had fried rice, stir fry with pork, and there was spiciness, and it was spectacular. And this is a 2014, so if you can see, it's got some depth of color on it. It just went. It's like a perfect match. You just admire. First of all, you admire the wine, and then you admire how both of them pair well together. And,
it's interesting with grape varietals that people don't think are all that prominent. They're actually delightful with food.
Yes.
I mean, Chardonnay is a nice wine.
Yes.
And it pairs well with typical cuisine. It's like whitefish, chicken. But frankly, that's kind of bland. And Chardonnay makes it come alive, but Chardonnay will not stand up to more complex foods. And so that's why it's fun to explore all these different grape varietals.
Well, Kevin, what you mentioned, and I think almost. So we have, California is known for a lot of variety, right? Probably more variety than any other part of the world. You have all types of cuisine in California: Chinese food, Indian food, Italian, French, etc., etc., and a lot of spicy foods. But the funny part of it, as you're kind of mentioning, California wine does not go well with California food.
I know. I mean, it's sort of funny.
Yeah.
It's like, Riesling goes great with both hot and spicy food, but Riesling needs minerals.
Yeah.
And so there are some people, trying to grow Riesling in California, but, not to denigrate California, because I like California wines too. But what do we mainly have here? We've got flat farmland. Doesn't have a lot of minerality in it. And, it's unfortunate what people's attitudes are about Riesling, because I think a lot of people initially either have like a super sweet Moselle Riesling, and it's like, oh, that's too sweet, I don't like that. Or they have one of these like bland, insipid California Rieslings that's grown in flat farmland. They're like, oh, this is a terrible grape. I have no interest in it.
Yeah.
But you grow it on these like steep, slopes, in Germany where there's basically no dirt in the vineyards. It's just broken up slate, and those wines just come alive, and then accentuate, all the additional complexity of spicy food. But you're right. I mean, California, really doesn't have wines with spicy foods, or doesn't have wines that go well with spicy foods, even though most Californians have a pretty adventurous palate. And they look for different sorts of foods experiences. In fact, one of the more interesting things to me, I mean, what's considered kind of almost more of a casual cuisine in California, is Mexican food.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed as I'm finding all of these, local wines, based on indigenous grapes all around Europe, how many of them pair just wonderfully with Mexican food. You think of things that are sort of spicier. I mean, chili verde. Things with mole sauce. I'm drinking a Monastrell in Yecla in Spain. I'm like, oh my God, this is just perfect with mole sauce.
Yeah.
I initially talked about the whites, but with the reds, you need an interesting combination of things. Against the complexity of the spice, reds that are kind of lighter and fruitier are great complements for that. And with those, you get grapes like Mencia, Corvino, which is the main grape in Valpolicella, Barbera and Dolcetto from Piemonte, Frappato from Sicilia. But with the complexity of spicier foods, you also want something that has a variety of components to it. So what's commonly known as a GSM blend, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. You get the fruitiness of the Grenache, the spiciness of the Syrah, and then the sort of rich, deep flavors of the Mourvedre, and they just pair wonderfully together. And I'm talking about Mourvedre, and so something else you might want to consider is something called Monastrell. Well, what on earth is Monastrell? Well, Monastrell is actually Mourvedre. What's the other way around? Mourvedre is Monastrell. Monastrell is a native Spanish grape that was discovered about 600 years ago, and it's spread to the southern Rhone, where it became known as Mourvedre. But with Monastrell, you get these big, rich, deep flavors. And so with the complexity of the spice and the heat of, hotter foods, it balances out with the rich, deep flavors of something like a, Monastrell / Mourvedre. Some other wines, that will also have, similar characteristics, to that, are like a Malbec or a Merlot. I mean, people think of Merlots as sort of lighter and fruitier, but Malbec has rich, deep, or Merlots have rich, deep flavors, which will complement well, with hotter and spicier foods. Another red that people don't think of as a heavier wine, but it has such a complexity of flavor characteristics. Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, typically expresses any minerals that are in the soil. So I also earlier talked about you want minerality to go along with spicy foods to refresh the palate. So with a Pinot Noir, you get the refreshing aspect of it typically being grown in minerally soils, with strong fruit components of the Pinot Noir to complement the spice and complement the the heat of hotter foods.
And Kevin, let me jump in. So first of all, everybody for joining, thank you for joining us, and please chime in. Add comments, questions, or some feedback. We'll comment to that. But Kevin, I was saying that your philosophy is kind of matching food with wine, and kind of the philosophy of our shop, Vinousreverie, for the adventurous wine drinker. And you basically outlined. So let me kind of go back where you were mentioning some of the wines. You were mentioning Mencia, which comes from northwest Spain. You were mentioning Monastrell, which is Mourvedre, which is starting Jumia. I think that's it's maybe his birthplace, but at least that's what it's most famous for. And then he went to Rhone. Funny enough, the same thing with Garnacha. It's a grape that started in Spain, most likely, and found its way to Southern Rhone, where it's most known. But you were also
Yes.
mentioning Prapado, which is like almost like a deep rosé from Sicily. And you know, I'll throw in another funky grape. I'm not sure if you heard of that, but I just came across a couple of months ago. It's Kadarka from Hungary. It's once again a light, fruity, like just beautiful red grape from Hungary. You know, Hungary is known for their sweet wines, Tokai, which are actually, you know, perfect. I think with matching with some of the spicy foods too. It's people don't typically think of them because they're very expensive wines, but they're great matches, I think, to a lot of specific spicy dishes. But I'm just go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a fun dinner in Budapest once. I don't have any Hungarian wines, but Hungary is known to use a lot of paprika.
Yes.
So I asked the server, well, what would you pair with this? And he paired this like light fruity red. I didn't at the time know what the grape varietal was, but it's exactly what you just described.
Yeah. Well, they have two. They have Kadarka, I think, which is indigenous, and then they have Kekfrankos, which is the same grape as Blaufränkisch from Austria. So another light red, very mineral, a lot of forest floor and tart-like fruit character. But we're talking, Kevin, you mentioned a lot of minerality, a lot of fruit, just a lot of balance and complexity, which frequently California wines just don't have. So it's kind of the philosophy, almost similar philosophies here. We come to these complex, fun, exciting, adventurous wines from all over the world, and we try to get other people to know about them, because I think once they go outside their California palate, I think there's a lot of excitement waiting for the consumer. That's the way I look at wine drinking. Is don't shortchange yourself on that front.
Yeah. One category I hadn't yet mentioned is rosés.
Yes.
Rosés are kind of a weird category, frankly. I mean, a lot of people think of rosés as some silly thing you drink for 3 months during the summer when you're out by your pool, but with the complexity of the spicy foods, a richer, more fully bodied rosé is just absolutely perfect. Because you get all the richness of the red fruit that the rosés are based on, but rosés have this sort of like refreshing minerality to them typically, which again is helps to cleanse your palate and wants to make you take the another bite of the food. And then there's some specific categories of wine, just the Vinho Verdes from northern Portugal. They're slightly effervescent, the Chacalés from the Basque Country. They're slightly as effervescent. That effervescence will help bring out the flavors of the spicy food, and again also refresh your palate. And most people wouldn't think of champagne with spicy food, but sparkling wines in general again have the qualities of refreshing your palate, and so something a bit lighter like a prosecco would typically be a great match for sparkling food. And I mentioned rosés a minute ago, but think of a sparkling rosé to go along with spicy and hotter food, because you get the rich fruit from the red and the rosé, and you get the effervescence from the sparkling wine.
And Kevin, I actually took down some notes of some specific examples, I think, to maybe get people started. So this episode, we should call it the dark art of matching spicy food with wine. So
yes.
Because I think it is an art form. A wine that I absolutely adore, and I don't think it frequently comes up, is Assyrtiko from the volcanic soils of Santorini in Greece. With octopus, which they specialize in, and Creole sauce. That sounds like an unbelievable combination. All right. The Chenin Blanc, which we were talking about, is one of the most versatile grapes out there. It's a spectacular grape.
With creamy curries. I mean, Chenin Blanc would be perfect for that. Or it would stand up to Indian tandoori dishes too.
Well, I had turmeric, saffron, cinnamon, coconut, creamy, nutty dishes, and northern Indian cuisine, kind of what you're mentioning. Tokai, when we were talking about the sweet wine of Hungary with Chinese five spice, that's a
Yeah.
combination that I came with. Gewürztraminer, which I think the name itself means spicy, curry, chicken satay, or turkey chili. Grüner Veltliner, which is a great combo for wasabi. Another fascinating combination. And this is actually, Kevin, maybe you can talk to some of it. Pinot Blanc or Weissburgunder with spicy Vietnamese chicken wings. It's a wine that you actually import, and I don't know if you ever tried it with spicy chicken wings.
Yeah, the Pinot Blanc is interesting because, again, it's a very clean, refreshing wine. It's like a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
And so anything hot or spicy, with a sip of Pinot Blanc between bites, I mean, you just want to come back and just eat more of what you're eating.
Exactly. To continue with my little Shakoli, when we're talking about Basque Country, which a lot of people think is the mecca of the culinary mecca of the world, shrimp tacos. I think that's a good combo. Viognier with red curry, and another one, rosés you were mentioning, and the same thing, the deeper style rosés, and a good example is actually Nero di Troia from Puglia region. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's from Northern Puglia.
Northern Puglia, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, one thing I'm not sure if I mentioned, but tannins, in my opinion,
Yes,
are great complements to spicy food. Because they sort of almost like cancel each other out.
yeah.
I mean, a wine that if it was more mild food that seemed too tannicky, you would feel like, oh, that's a little astringent. But against the heat or the spice of spicier foods, they complement each other well. I think I mentioned some before. I mean, like Malbec, Nero di Troia, and there was another one that was kind of tannicky. Oh, Montepulciano di Abruzzo.
Yeah, well, and my next example was probably as tannic as it gets, is the Xenomorph Grape from Greece, which they frequently compare to Nebbiolo. It's a medium-bodied wine with lots of tannins and with spicy braised shore ribs. I think it's a good example, and I think it's right to what you were talking about, how tannins work with spice frequently. So
yes.
I think these are like fun combinations. Kevin, the one thing I kind of think about is like we were talking about, it's art to put the food and the wine, especially the spicy food. And I frequently find like a restaurant. I'll give you a specific example. Slanted Door restaurant in San Francisco. It's a very prestigious restaurant. It's Vietnamese restaurant. And then there's Burma Superstar, another highly thought of restaurant in San Francisco. So one of them, Slanted Door, you see it like in all the top 100 lists, frequently mentioned all the time. Where I hardly ever see Burma Superstar. And even though I think Burma Superstar, to me, has better cuisine, but they don't have a better wine list. It's actually a very pedestrian wine list, at least the last time I was there. Whereas Slanted Door has a spectacular wine list full of a lot of these aromatic wine, like Riesling, Chenin Blanc, just a lot of spicy food-friendly wines. Whereas restaurants that put a wine on the back burner, I think it kind of detracts from the overall experience. I think wine should be a big part of the restaurant's menu, and adventurous wine especially.
Yeah, for me, knowing how my wines pair with food, given that I like to cook myself, and also knowing how well the wines I selected pair with spicy foods, I went to all of these like Asian restaurants trying to market my wines, and they kind of looked at me like, oh, we're happy with our Chardonnay.
Yes.
You know, and you know, partly it's a factor of the local population base, you know, because, you know, they just, you know, don't think that somebody really knows that much about all these different grape varietals. You know, in an area where, frankly, you know, people think that the world only has 10 grape varietals.
Yeah.
You know, for whites, you know, Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. You know, and so that's what a lot of local wine lists have on them. You
Yeah.
know, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I almost got nowhere with any of the, you know, more like, you know, Asian cuisined restaurants. Yeah, I mean, because, yeah, I mean, you know, they were focusing on their food
Yeah.
without all that much knowledge of how the food actually pairs with wine. You know,
Yeah. And no, that's, I wanted to go in that direction too, and that's basically what I look at. And to me, once I see the wine list, I kind of like, oh, and there's the Frank family Chardonnay. It's the same players that you see, like, all the time. It's yeah, it's people recognize that. But like to me, there's no secret why like Michelin rated restaurants, the French Laundry, or even something, a once Michelin star restaurant, they all have spectacular wine lists. There's not a single Michelin star restaurant that has a pedestrian wine list. Not a single one.
yeah.
And I think it's almost with many of these restaurants that you were saying that are trying to be, for vanilla, for the like a better word, very conservative in their selections. They might get their like followers, but they're not really gonna expand beyond that, because to me, I think if you want to showcase, if your cuisine is really as good as you think it is, it has to match with the wine. I think it's a must.
Yeah, I think with the restaurants, I mean, they need to be more active in, talking to their customers about the wines they've selected. Yeah, because I don't know how many times in trying to market to restaurants, I heard the same old story. Well, we once had a Chenin Blanc on the menu, but nobody knew what it was, so nobody ever ordered it.
Yeah.
It's like, try to educate your customers how well it goes with your food.
Yeah.
And that's why there's such value in independent wine shops like yours, because you're the expert on how all these different varietals taste, what their aromatic profiles are, and then also how they pair with food.
Yeah.
I mean, the experience in the last year, although maybe not all that pleasant for most of us, it's been an interesting experience because most people have been eating at home.
Yes.
Yeah. And from that, hopefully people have, developed a greater appreciation of, what would be fun to open with tonight's dinner instead of, what do we do tonight? Is it Cabernet or Pinot Noir? Or is it, Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc?
Kevin, actually, that's very interesting what you're talking about, because from what I've read, when people say recessions happen and stuff like that, the people actually start buying more what's in their comfort zone, which is the Chardonnays and the Cabernet Sauvignons. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if people became even less adventurous while they were eating at home, which was obviously a missed opportunity to become more adventurous and, frankly, find some new favorites. And I could almost guarantee you would have found some new favorites if you became more adventurous.
Yeah. I mean, I have heard a little bit of that going out and talking to clients.
Yeah.
I mean, certain customers go into these clients and like, I just want another bottle of such and such Chardonnay.
Yes.
It's like, they're not even willing to consider something else. But, it's been a tough environment for everybody. But, what's fun to me about all this is, given that, I make food that tastes exactly how I want it to taste every night. And not that I do drink every night, because I don't, frankly, but, I mean, the way I, develop diversity in the foods that I eat is how I season them. And so, depending on how I season it, I can think of, of a specific wine that goes well with that. I mean, that's why, I mean, I have like, probably 60 different white wine varietals
Yeah.
in my portfolio, because I can think of all these different foods that are going to pair well with each of those varietals and how you would prepare those foods.
Just to
That's
chime in, Kevin, today, my wife Anna, we were having dinner, and she's like, "I love white wine more than red wine," and I'm like, "Me too." Me too. Yeah.
frankly, there is a lot more variety in white wine
Yeah.
than red wine. When you start getting into the blends with red wines, you can, have some pretty interesting wines. But I mean, this is like, as I said a minute ago, I probably have 60 different varietals of white wines in my portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, just Italy itself, right? That's just what 1,300 varieties that they have. So obviously, not all of them are noble grapes, but there's plenty of fun things from all these different regions that they have. It's just fun going through all the indigenous varieties that they have. So it's one wine actually. I have an Italian white wine 6-pack, what I sell, and I have a wine from you. So if you could give a little overview, it's the, you know what it is, Chocola or what's it?
Oh, the Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And the best way I have to compare this is against some other somewhat obscure grapes, but Semillon is the principal grape in white Bordeaux. A blend of Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. And Semillon adds creaminess to the acidity and sort of aromatics of Sauvignon Blanc. And Coca-Cola has very, very similar creaminess and richness to it, as Semillon does. But there's something about it being grown right next to the seashore on the Adriatic in Abruzzo that you get this salinity that's sort of like a good Chablis. So it's almost like blending a Semillon and a Chablis, and that's another thing that's fun about the characteristics you get out of these different native varietals. That's been a really fun one in the portfolio. And every time I taste it, I'm just struck. God, this is really delicious. And who's ever heard of it? It's Coca-Cola.
Well, Kevin, I mean, just taking notes. On one hand, we're just discussing, buttery Chardonnay. That's the term. On the other hand, you're talking about salinity, Adriatic, Abruzzo. I mean, how does it not get more adventurous? Like, which one's adventurous, which one's not adventurous? When you hear the two conversations, to me, it's just, I would encourage everybody to become adventurous. I think the only person who's missing out is you when you're not adventurous. That's kind of my last blanket statement.
Yeah, I mean, one way or one analogy I have about this is: would you go to a movie theater and continually watch the same movie every night?
Yes.
No, you wouldn't.
Yes.
And so try some different wines. I mean, there's some that you're not going to like, but you're going to have some delightful discoveries. In all this, like, oh, this is really interesting. This really just matches what kinds of flavors and aromas I prefer. Yeah.
And Kevin, the one thing I would add to that, because there is I don't know, a catch to that, is I think frequently when people like what they know, they buy from the wineries that they know. It's premium wines. But then when they try something new, they go to Trader Joe and they buy it for $6. And then they're like, oh, I don't like this varietal. Well, that's because you probably had a bad expression of that varietal. So to me, it's not good enough just to go and buy the cheapest example. Most of the wines that we're talking about, they're about $20. They're not super expensive wines, but they're not $6 either. So, I think if you spend that money in that price range, there's a great chance that you're going to be tasting a really good wine. And it's independent wine stores for the most part that carry these wines.
Yeah, the story about Trader Joe's is
Yeah,
hilarious because, well, one day I bought, I like making beef stews, so I thought, I want something kind of like rich and flavorful to like, you know, pour into the stew pot and then, and then drink the rest of the bottle when I'm drinking the stew. And it was like an $8 Nero d'Avola. Not only did it make the stew taste terrible, but it was awful to drink.
yeah,
Afterwards. But a good Nero d'Avola from Sicily is just delightful.
yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's made. It's not mass produced. That's the thing. It's
yeah,
made by farmers who take care of their soils. They come from premium sites. There's all that stuff. It's people who take care of their land. Not all grapes are like that. So there's no. There's kind of wishful thinking, or if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true, right?
yeah.
I think consumers sometimes feel like, oh, let me get like a cheaper example from like the big box store. It's like, no, what you're getting is a cheap wine for whatever that stands for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the retailing side of this, it's complicated, and but effectively, if you see something for $8 somewhere, it's something that some winery, frankly, did not want to bottle under their own brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like start with that and think, oh, well, do you really want to drink it either?
Yes.
know,
No.
or it's grapes that they decided not to, to vinify into their own wines.
Yeah.
And it's like, everybody loves a bargain, but in the wine world, there's a reason why some of these bargains exist.
Yeah.
If they felt like vinifying it into their own wine, which would then be 15 or $20, they would have, but no, they chose not to. So it ends up somewhere.
Well, it's like the old saying, right? You get what you pay for. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the point is people frequently they try this cheap example, which is most likely not going to be any good. They're like, oh, I don't like it. Let me go back to what I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, I once bought this $7.99 Albarino. In fact, Albarino is another great grape. I think will go well with spicy foods. I bought the $7.99 Albarino from Trader Joe's. And I'm not trying to trash Trader Joe's because, for full disclosure, I effectively have not been to a supermarket in 20 years. Because I like to cook, I want to find a place for good ingredients. And Trader Joe's has great food. I mean, I just get all these good ingredients from their fresh produce area, and I've bought all my produce there for probably 20 years. But it's like I look, but out of curiosity, occasionally I'll buy one of the wines. I bought this $7.99 Albarino, and I don't even know what it tasted like. I mean, this is another issue in wine, frankly. It's like there's all these consultants out there that are telling people what they have to make their wines taste like to sell more of it, and it's like, and the unfortunate trend in that is they tell people to make everything taste like Chardonnay, as in this discussion, it's like with hot and spicy foods, you need more complex wines, but it's like, this Albarino, it tasted like Chardonnay. I don't want my Albarinos to taste like Chardonnay. I want them to taste like Albarinos.
Well, Kevin, that's why I think for a casual consumer, it's overwhelming. For people like you and me, I read a lot about things, and what you notice is that there's millions of wines out there, but when you start reading different people, different professionals, writers, etc., you notice that the circles of great winemakers, it becomes really, really small. There's like few hundred great producers.
Yeah.
It's uncanny because you start reading, like New York Times, Forbes, Jensen Robinson, Robert Parker, and you see that like they start mentioning the same people, getting the 90-point scores, etc., etc. And obviously there's newer producers that try to break in, but they get their name too. For example, on our Friday night show last Friday, we had Audrey Chapman from Newfound Wines. They're actually trying to make Mediterranean wines, Counois, Grenache, Mourvedre in California. And the reason I came across them is in December, Justice Robinson put one of the wines as wine of the week. And funny enough, last week, Esther Mobley from San Francisco Chronicle also put them as wine of the week. So as you can see, they're being noticed. Like, these people are not putting Trader Joe's $7 wines as wine of the week. They're not. And Kevin, the reason I know is that I shop at Trader Joe too, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't know what Trader Joe sells. But wine, they don't make fine. They don't sell fine wine, for as a blanket statement. But this is I'm not saying this is like the Safeways of the world, and all the big box stores. That's a different conversation. But I think I think what we're trying to do is debunk myth. And I think people will be skeptical. Well, we're pushing it for our own self-interest. Maybe, but I think one of the things you could say is that, like, what have you bought that was too good to be true and was actually true? Like, nothing. So why would it be with wine? Like, why would it exist with wine? Right? It wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, you know what's so interesting about this is before we were prevented from traveling a year ago. I mean, one favorite activity of people with a reasonable amount of disposable income is they go to this part of the world or that part of the world, and they hire a guide to show them the sights. And I mean, usually these trips were like at a minimum like $500 a day per person. And think of what you're doing with your wine shop. I mean, you're providing a tour of all these different parts of the world where they produce wine. Yeah. And you're not charging people $500 a day.
No, that's what I said. It's a wine travelogue. That's what we call our Friday night show. It's a wine travelogue. I think it's, a spectacular showcase of the wine world for free. So, and the bottles of wine we sell will only add pleasure. It's a cherry on top.
Yeah, but when the people come in and buy that nice $20 bottle of wine, I think you should charge them an extra $500 for being a tour guide.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for not doing that. So, no, but it's fun. I mean, Kevin, I think we went on a tangent, but I think it's it started with spicy food and adventurous wine. So you're eating adventurous food, you're drinking adventurous wine, and I think this is a fun conversation. And you added so much, I think, like details and educational component that I think makes the wine more fun and less intimidating.
Yes. Well, I mean, personally, I enjoy exploring, and so that's why I've ended up with 160 wines from 40 wine regions in Europe.
And guys, check out Kevin's portfolio, wustwine.com. So it's wustwine.com, and check out our store, vinousreverie. And guys, please chime in on Instagram. And me and Kevin will do the same thing next week. We'll pick a topic and discuss it in detail. Busting myth and providing education. I think it's a fun conversation. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Kevin, for doing the show.
You're welcome, Igor. Have a nice night.
Have a nice night, guys. Bye.
Okay. All right. Bye.